The tall, human-like figure moved about the thick of the trees with no struggle at all. It was as if it was floating. It made no noise, and the only movement seen was the creature lunging forward. It was graceful yet terrifying. My eyes grew as I watched it skim over the frozen lake and back into the trees. I tried to make out its facial features, but I couldn't. Perhaps it was the fog or my lack of concentration. I was just relieved that I hadn't seen its face, though I had tried. I'm sure it was just as horrifying as the tentacle-like bones extruding from the creature's back. Time stood still, and I froze the closer I got to it. Why was I approaching this thing anyways? That I still don't know. Something about it was inviting, though. Something about it made me want to come to it. My heart was pounding at a fast rate, but my legs were moving faster. As I chased the creature, it turned a sharp corner, and I turned right behind it, but stopped myself dead in my tracks when I saw it had stopped itself. In front of it was a small girl around 9 years of age. She stared up at it in horror, and I feared for her life as well as mine. I tried to wave her off, but to no avail. She seemed captivated by the creature's appearance, the way I had been. She slowly stood up, and as she did, I fell back and crawled behind a bush. I couldn't look away, but all I did was watch. The creature brought its face closer to hers, and as it did, her eyes grew huge, and she began to shake, covering her ears. She was terrified, and compared to her, I had nothing to be afraid of. She was only mere inches away from the being, and she was now looking at it, face to face. I'd never seen someone take in something and consider it deeply, and yet have such terror in their eyes. The little girl fell, but as I took a closer look, I could see her small chest filling with air and releasing. She wasn't dead, but she was unconscious. I took a closer look at it, and from my observations, I concluded that the being's gender was male. It took her and dragged her behind it. He was slowly creeping ahead this time, and I felt the need to follow, so of course, I did so with no hesitation. I was at the point that I couldn't even think. After several minutes of following, he stopped at a clearing. The trees that surrounded the empty area were draped in ropes and nooses. Mutilated bodies and limbs were hanging from them. One body had been hung slowly, I could tell. The fingers that once looked remotely human had been clawing at its own throat, trying to break free from the noose. What was this? There had at least been 30 murders committed here. I looked in terror at my surroundings. Guts hanging out of torn skin, people with gouged out eyes. I began to panic, and soon I felt tears streaming down my face. Then, I turned my attention to the girl. The poor girl had been gutted in the short amount of time that it took me to realize where we were. Her eyes were gone and her limbs had been cut off, but the creature was gripping the stubs to slow the bleeding. I only cried harder when I saw her working yet displaced lungs and her beating heart. Everything was still working, because nothing had been removed fully. She was still alive. That's when, with one movement, the creature ripped her heart away from what was keeping it beating. I gagged and almost vomited, but stopped myself. I couldn't let this happen to me. Not like all those other people. I couldn't let myself be hurt, but my body was frozen, so I couldn't turn away and run. He then hung what was left of her body up from a rope. The surrounding trees, I had noticed, were dead. He stopped all movement while hanging the child's left arm up. He knew of my presence, and he quickly turned around and faced me. Terror took over, and I tried to let out a scream for help, but I couldn't. I knew this was what death himself looked like. I saw nothing. He was faceless. He had no face, and yet he was the most terrifying thing I had ever laid my eyes on. Right as he turned, I heard a faint, shrieking noise, a very loud, ear-piercing buzzing, the kind that you would hear from a TV that lost service and shows nothing but static. And in hearing this, I saw what seemed to look like static as well. Everything around me began to spin and blur into nothing but black. Though before it did, the creature revealed to me that he did have a mouth, and how he did this still pains me to think about. He showed no pain, but instead a murderous grin. The pale skin that should have been a face slowly stretched until it ripped open in the form of a mouth. Parts of skin were still intact, and the skin on the corners of his newfound mouth ripped upward to form a contorted smile. I knew I was seeing what the girl had seen, and I knew I was hearing what she heard as well. I was now unconscious, and I knew for sure that I wouldn't wake up. What happens next shocked me. I didn't know why he didn't kill me, and I didn't know why he'd take me to a different part of the woods before I had a chance to wake up. But for whatever reason, he spared me. And I know why now, because I've read about it. This creature was the Slender Man, and now that I've read more about him, I know now that his normal prey is children, and that alone is the only reason why he didn't waste his time on me. Even though he had the perfect opportunity to kill me, he didn't because I wasn't a child. Maybe he simply gets a sick joy from murdering innocents, but I don't want to know, and you shouldn't want to know either. I'd like this to be the last time I ever talk about it, though it is the only time. Please be cautious, and for whatever reason you may go into the woods, don't. If you decide to and you spot the Slender Man, look away right as soon as you do. And don't look any longer, or the same will happen to you. And trust me, once you see him, he will reveal himself to you a lot more than once. He still to this day follows me. Please don't let the same happen to you.